Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything, and we're coming at you with another Wargaming in Miniature video. In this video, we're continuing on with our Warlords of Erehwon boot camp. In this boot camp, we're going through the rules chapter by chapter, kind of explaining them and giving you my take on the rules. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all the special rules. Those are the unique special rules that certain units might have. There's a list of them. I'm going to lead it off with the name of the special rule and then what it does for your unit. Let's start with allied monsters. Allied monsters may be monstrous, but they're not always. Allied monsters cannot benefit from the command, hero, or follow special rules as your warband's character. They're a lot like bound monsters and wild monsters, but they fight just like any other unit in your army. Baleful glare. Some creatures only have to look at your enemies to send them running, turn them to stone, or reduce them to quivering wreck. A baleful glare is a single ranged attack with a range of 20. If the target unit is hit, it suffers no hits as such, but it suffers 1 plus d3 pins instead of taking the 1 pin for a hit. And then it must make a break test. Beastly breath. Some monsters can breathe fumes. If a monster breathes its beastly breath, roll a d6. This is the number of ranged attack with a range of up to 20 inches. Beast is kind of like a right? Beastly breath counts as choking attack, which means any hit scored ignore armor and cover when it comes to taking resistance checks. See choking. Berserk. Fighters that have Berserk special rule are deranged, intoxicated, or fallen far under the influence of source that they feel almost no pain and fight in a frenzy of blows, disregarding their own safety. In a fury of uncoordinated battle lust. They might have worked themselves into a religious fervor, or more likely they are stoked up on a strong booze, dangerous mind-altering drugs. It's not your place to judge. Berserk troops making either an order test or a reaction test to charge will always succeed, the same way as if they had rolled a 1, so long as the enemy is within charge distance. No test is necessary, just imagine a 1. In addition, Berserk troops fight with double attacks in hand-to-hand combat. This usually means 2 attacks rather than just 1. If the fighter would otherwise have 2, 3, or more attacks, then the number is doubled. The Berserk rule ceases to apply as soon as if the unit fails a break test or is defeated in hand-to-hand fighting. If the unit fails a break test or is defeated, the sudden confrontation with cold reality is instantly sobering and the unit ceases to be Berserk. Blundering. Blundering creatures are great, oafish, clumsy things that find it difficult to move quickly or cross obstacles. Blundering cannot sprint, and furthermore, whenever it runs, it has to make an agility stat. As if it was sprinting, it'll take a pin if it fails. Blundering is the same as chariot or artillery when crossing an obstacle. This means it cannot run while crossing. Bound monster. Bound monsters are controlled by some kind of magical compunction. Bound monsters cannot benefit from command, hero, or follow special rules. If a bound monster fails an order test on a roll of 10, it immediately takes d6 pins. If this is sufficient to break it, then it breaks its bonds and heads for the hills, takes to the air, or makes its escape. The unit is removed as if it was broken. Challenger. The code of chivalry dictates the bearers of little brain and big swords should meet in mortal combat to determine which of them would be eradicated from the gene pool for the common good. So keen are some upon this notion, they will seek out even the most monstrous and least chivalrous opponent to challenge in a duel to the death. You can't but admire their pluck. Okay, if a model has a challenge rule, then it can initiate a challenge to the death against any combat opponent. Player must state the model is issuing a challenge before the two sides begin to fight, including before any exchange of missiles. The opposing player has no choice but to comply. The fight becomes a fight to the death between the two units. Fight a round of close combat. Calculate which side is won. Only if the result is a draw, fight a round of follow-on combat to decide which side has won. Once the combat has been fought, the loser is destroyed without a further test. It doesn't matter whether the losing side has models remaining. One combat is complete, the victor unceremoniously slaughters the whole lot of them. In the event of a follow-on round, also proving a draw, just treat the combat result as a regular draw. The challenge has failed to produce an entirely terminal result despite the festival of bloodletting. We'll call it a draw. The challenge rule is a pretty dangerous affair for the challenger, of course, but it is also a handy way of tackling those big ugly beasties that can otherwise only be overcome by rolling against their damage chart. So like those monstrosities we just talked about, you charge in, and if you think you're going to get more hits or you think you're going to get more pins on the guy, challenge him to the death, especially like if you have a lance and you're charging. Chunder. The Chunderous attack is a special ability of trolls. These repulsive regurgitators can spontaneously hurl forth the corrosive contents of their stomachs upon their foes. A Chunder, or vomit, counts as a ranged attack with a range of 10. Chunder attacks can dissolve flesh, metal, and practically anything instead of a strike value. All models hit by Chunder attacks have an unmodified resist roll of 5. It doesn't matter what the victim's actual resist stat is or what modifiers might normally apply against a Chunderous hit. All rolls of 1 to 5 pass with no effect, and all rolls of 6 to 10 fail. Rerolls of resist tests are allowed, and they would normally be. Once a Chundering unit has made its Chunder attack, roll a d10. On a roll of 6 to 10, the creatures have heaved up everything they have, and therefore no more Chunder attacks that game. On a 1 to 5, there's still plenty left. Choking. Choking attacks are associated with poisonous vapors, foul gases, and the rancid breath of some creature. If you're hit by a choking attack, either by shooting or hand-to-hand, it gets no armor bonus or cover bonus. Command. The command rule is unique to Warlords and indicates that this individual is in charge of the warband. Warlords usually have higher command stats than other members. Any friendly unit within 10 inches of a model with the command special rule can use the model's command stat to make any command-based tests, recovery, break, order tests, but it still must apply the pin. Crazed Psychotic. The rule is a unique feature of mentally unstable dwarves of a particularly doleful disposition. Unhealthy axe fixation and unquieted death wish. Crazed Psychotic dwarfs tend to eschew armor as unnecessary, if not actually cowardly. The rule shares some similarities with the Berserk rule and adds a few extras of its own. Unlike the Berserk rule, it never goes away. Crazed Psychotic troops just stay mad. Crazed Psychotic troops making either an order test or reaction test to charge will always succeed. Crazed Psychotic troops cannot be routed as a result of a break test. They are immune to routing. Crazed Psychotic units are unaffected by dread and terror. They are also unhinged. They positively relish the prospect of getting close and personal with vast, unhygienic, and murderous monsters. Crazed Psychotic units are entirely immune to the dread and terror rules. Dead Eye Shot. These troops are expert marksmen, gifted by nature, or possess the skills of honed and extensive training. They get to reroll one missed attack each time the unit shoots. Deathly Chill. It's a supernatural attack associated with some kinds of undead. Deathly Chill attacks ignore all armor bonuses. Discipled. Discipled troops are highly trained, stalwart, and confident. A discipled unit that passes a rally order loses all of its pins. Even a unit that is routing will lose all of its pins if it passes a command test due to a nearby unit making a rally order. Divine Intervention. If a unit has the Divine Intervention rule, it enjoys a special relationship with whatever half-crazed notion of a deity it happens to believe in. If a unit has the Divine Intervention rule, it has the ability to steal an order given to an enemy unit within 20 inches. This works as follows. The opposing player pulls an order die and declares an order on behalf of a unit in the regular way. Before the order is enacted or any order test taken, you can declare you are calling upon your gods to intervene in your favor. Take a standard test against your unit's command. If you fail the test, then the gods are deaf to your demands, and the opposing player continues. And you suffer a pin. Perhaps your gods are annoyed with you. If you pass, then you can take the opposing player's order die, and your own unit can use it to attempt an order. This is just as if your unit has drawn its own order die. You can do this even if the unit has already received an order, and using the opposing player's die doesn't stop you from receiving your own order die. It's just as if your unit were suddenly a monstrosity. A unit can only take one attempt to divine intervention in any turn, whether successful or otherwise. A unit whose dice is stolen this way is still treated as having received an order and cannot be given another order that turn, unless it's a monstrosity. A helpful marker might help you remember this. Dread. Many supernatural or otherwise horrific unnatural beasties cause dread. When a model attempts to shoot at a dreaded enemy, all shots are -1 penalty to his accuracy. When you attempt to strike a dreaded enemy, you get -1 penalty to strength. If you're defeated in hand-to-hand against a dreaded enemy, you suffer an additional -1 to your command value when taking the subsequent break. A unit that causes dread is not affected by enemy units that also cause dread, regardless of how dreadful they might be. Many flying critters and aerial machines get to drop bombs, rocks, dung, rubbish. It's treated as one or more range attacks with a 10-inch range. Variable stats as indicated in the model stat line. Drops always ignore cover because they're straight down from the skies. During an exchange of missile, drops can only be used where a flying unit is charging a non-flying unit, because you can't drop things on flying units. Strike value will vary, might have a number of attacks, might vary. Drop attacks can potentially be fire attacks or choking attacks with the associated special rules. These are indicated in the stat line. For example, bombs dropped from a dwarf flying machine are 3 times drop strike value 4 fire. So you'd make 3 attacks with a strike value of 4, and they would have a fire special rule, which we'll get to in just a second. Enchanted steeds. Enchanted steeds are a specialty of your elves and elf-esque critters such as seed, sprites, and fairies. Their party trick is the ability to gallop over water as easily as over land, enabling the rider to gallop over the very oceans. Enchanted steeds treat all water, including marshes and bogs and other wet stuff, as open ground. In addition, enchanted steeds have an uncanny ability to dodge and weave their way around danger. So mounted units riding enchanted steeds are allowed to reroll on resist tests against shooting attacks. This only applies to shooting attacks and not close combat. Fast. Fast units move at a faster rate than the standard 5 inches. The distance moved varies and is given in the special rules column. So like fast 6 means you move 6 inches. And in a 2 move, we move 12, and 3 move, we'd be 18. When shooting at a fast target that is a current run order, any hit scored must be re-rolled. These units are moving fast. Ferocious Charge gets a +1 to its strength bonus. So if he charges and has Ferocious Charge, it'll get a +2, only if it charges. Fire. Creatures, most notably dragons, may be able to breathe fire, in which case it is indicated on their stat line. Could be fire attacks, including fiery balls, for example. If a unit is hit by 1 or more fire attacks, either from ranged attacks or hand-to-hand attacks, then it takes 1 extra pin over any other pin. Frenzied Charge. If the unit charges, each model with the Frenzied Charge rule gains an extra attack in the first round. Note that bonus attack applies every time the unit charges, but only on the first round, and not the following. Flaming Breath. Some monsters can breathe fire. This example enables them to make ranged attacks up to 20 inches. Flaming Breath attacks are fire attacks and will always inflict an extra pin. Flame Breath attacks various numbers of creatures and has a various strike value. Flaming Wheel. What self-respecting band of flagellants wouldn't want a gigantic flaming wheel to push along as they march into an apocalyptic accompanied by doom-laden chanting and the percussive crack of the whip? As it is a bit on the dangerous side, and a lucky somebody could get seriously hurt or even badly mangled if it would fall over, still, just look at it. Brings you tears to the eye, doesn't it? But that just might be the hair. If a unit of flagellants has a flaming wheel, it is pushed along as part of the unit's formation. It takes at least 3 flagellants to push the wheel, and should the unit fall below this number, the wheel topples over, inflicting hits on the unit. A unit cannot make a 2M or greater run move while it is pushing the wheel. It is restricted to a maximum of 1M. The unit pushing the wheel can give it a great big heave and shove it towards the enemy. This requires a fire order, and the unit cannot otherwise shoot in the same turn. The wheel moves along the ground surface, and any unit it moves over suffers D6, strike value 6 hits from fire attack. Treat these as ranged attacks on the unit that has been struck. The wheel moves right over any model in its path and continues on its way until it falls over or leaves the battlefield. To start the wheel off, the player points it at the desired direction and moves the wheel 10 inches. Note that the wheel does not strike the flagellants pushing it, even if the models are placed in the path. Once the wheel has moved, both players roll a die and the higher scorer can turn the wheel up to 45 degrees. The wheel then moves another 10 inches, striking anything in its path, up to 45 degrees. So you don't have to turn. Players roll again, move the wheel again, and so on until the wheel either falls over or leaves the table. The wheel falls over if it runs into anything it can't cross, notably any impassable terrain, difficult terrain, or obstacles. If it falls over, both players rolls the same die then, deciding who is going to move the wheel. If the wheel falls over, it is destroyed in a flame. It also falls over if both players roll the same die score. It should go without saying that a flaming wheel can only be used, but it is very spectacular for that. It can be very deadly if the players manage to retain control of it, but sadly, this isn't all that likely. If the opposing player gains control, he is likely to send it catering off towards your own troops or into the nearest impassable terrain. Okay, this is a weird rule. It's called FIES, which I think it should be called fly. Some units can fly. These might be flying machines or creatures with some kind or sake or practically. A flying unit can move through any terrain without testing agility. Once a flying unit is moved, it is still considered to be behind the terrain. Think of it as hopping from one place to the other. A flying unit can move over the top of other units, whether friend or foe. Still has to stay an inch away. It's impossible for a non-flying enemy to charge or initiate a follow-on round of hand-to-hand combat against flying units unless they're down, but you can shoot them. They cannot be hit by overhead shooting unless they're down. Follow. Warlords usually have the follow rule in addition to the command special rule, and it is conceivable that other heroic or distinguished characters also. When the character's unit is given an order, in addition to the unit making the action, any other friendly units within 5 inches of the unit can make the same action, assuming they have no pins and are otherwise able to take actions. When activating multiple units in this way, the player begins by placing the order die for the character's own unit. A dice is then drawn from the die bag for each unit that is going to follow and activate. The character's unit makes its action first. After this, the player chooses one of the other units and follows the same action. Once this unit has completed its action, then you choose another, and so on. Hand-to-hand attack. Models normally get one hand-to-hand attack. If a model has more, it'll say 2 HTH, or 3 HTH, or 4 HTH, etc. Some monsters have more than one kind of hand-to-hand. These might be given examples, like 3 hand-to-hand with strike value of 3, 1 with a hand-to-hand strike value of 6, and deadly chill. In some situations, models might strike with a random number of attacks, in which case, roll the indicated number of dice. Haughty disdain. Is that the best you can do, really? Units with the haughty disdain rule automatically pass their first break test they are required to take in the game, regardless of whatever causes it. There is no need to roll the dice. Simply imagine the test they rolled a 1. Heavily laden. Heavily laden best describes medieval-style foot. Heavily laden units cannot sprint. They can otherwise move normally and can run at double pace without further restriction. Warriors and mounted units with strength of 5 or less also suffer a reduction of one of their agility and initiative. This reduction is already incorporated into their stat line if heavily laden is included in their special rule. So Warlords already figured that out for us. Hero. Some characters have the hero special rule. These could be warlords or some more likely to be individual heroes or champions, great warriors. If a hero is within 10 inches of a friendly unit, that unit can use the hero's initiative to make any reaction. Howling, horror, ammunition. Why chuck rocks at your enemy when you can chuck screaming, biting, howling skulls? It is the enchanted ammunition that both harms and horrifies. If a unit is hit by howling horror ammunition, it suffers D3 additional pins on top of any pins otherwise inflicted. Note that howling horror ammunition affects even the undead, sending all into confusion and chattering skulls crunch and chomp through the bone of dried flesh. Irresistible charge. If the unit charges, then it adds an extra D3 to its strike value. Roll a D3 and add the score as a bonus to the unit's strike. Irresistible is admittedly something of an exaggeration, only when charged and not in the ensuing rounds of combat. Some models have the large special rule, which means they are just unusually massive. For example, a big monster, a huge war machine. Many large models don't have bases and are so large that they overlap their bases. For this reason, it is usually a measure of the model's body when shooting or measuring distances, rather than the model's base. Like if I was using the spider. It doesn't have a base. You just measure the body of the model. Mechanical genius. It's well known that dwarves love tinkering, even more than gold. Okay, if the character with a mechanical genius rule is within 10 inches of an artillery piece, add to the accuracy value when you shoot. If the character with the mechanical genius rule is within 10 inches of a monstrous machine, then if a roll is made on a damage chart, the player can choose to add or deduct 1 from the result. The mechanical genius has been gapping the plugs and oiling the valves when no one was looking. Monstrosity dice. Monstrosity are unlike other units and they have more than one order die. We discussed this in Monstrosities chapter. Overhead. Overhead shots are lobbed high. We talked about that in shooting. Pavis. A pavis is a large, heavy shield that can be propped up and to basically form a rigid defense. Crossbowmen favor this kind of large shield as it gives them something nice and solid to shelter behind while they reload their cumbersome weapon. A unit carries a pavis. It suffers a -3 penalty to its agility stat because it's lugging this huge barn door. If a unit carries a pavis, it cannot be given a run order unless they choose to abandon the pavis. Can be placed in front of a unit, creating a static linear obstacle that is equivalent to a wall with a +2 resistance modifier for cover. The pavis line is 1 inch long for every model in the unit. When the line is created, if you mount each pavis onto its own base, this can be facilitated very easily. So you put your troops out and then you put the pavis models in front. If all models in the unit fall casualty, the pavises are abandoned by default. Once abandoned, pavises are lost and cannot be picked up again. They are knocked down, trampled, smashed. Ramshackle contraption. Contraptions of this kind, knocked up by crazed inventors in sheds in defiance of all health and safety concerns. If a unit is in a ramshackle contraption, then on a failed order test of a 10, roll on the damage chart for the monstrosity and apply the result. Ranged attacks. If a model has a natural or multiple ranged attack, this is indicated as a 2x, 3x, 4x. If model has a special kind of attack, this might be expressed simply as beastly breath or chunder, where the values for these things are fixed. Where the values of ranged attacks vary, it might be expressed as a 2x. Rapid sprint. Some characters have the rapid sprint special rule, enabling them to make or even faster bursts. Instead of sprinting at 3 times, they would sprint at 4 times. So a model with a standard move of 5 could move 5, could run 10, could sprint 15 or 20. Regenerate. Trolls are notorious for growing back bits almost as soon as they cut them off. The regenerate rule works exactly like the tough special rule, and any rules considerations that affect tough affect regenerate. The regenerate rule obliges a unit to re-roll a failed resistance test. The player has no choice in the matter. The creature attempts to regenerate whether you want it to or not. If a re-roll is successful, the damage is regenerated, but the unit suffers 1 pin to show that it is writhing, curdling flesh, taking a moment to pull itself together. Any pin suffered in this way can potentially affect its command-based tests that are required. Even cause the unit to automatically break. Regenerate does not work against damage inflicted by fire attacks. Fire burns away the flesh. Savage. Savage rule is given to warriors and creatures that are, well, savage. If a unit is a savage special rule, then the first time it fights hand-to-hand combat in the game, it can reroll any failed strength tests made to hit the enemy. This applies to all attacks, even those from mounts, spirits, etc. Just take any dice that failed to score hits and roll them again. Remember the rules of 1s and 10s though. Even if the unit has a savage rule, it still cannot reroll scores of 10. And remember, you cannot reroll a reroll. Shield wall. The shield wall rule applies to troops who are trained to fight in a tight formation using their shields to cover friends as well as themselves. They can make a wall by locking their shields together, forming a barrier to missiles and blows. It is very useful tactical formation, but it does limit a unit's mobility, especially in rough terrain. To take advantage of the shield wall, all the models in the unit must be placed so that their bases touch, forming a solid line or dense clump. This is a shield wall formation. If the unit is in a shield wall formation, it cannot sprint, and it suffers -1 to agility and initiative. So long as a unit in a shield wall formation, any enemy shooting at it or striking blows against it suffer -1 to their accuracy or strength. A unit which charges or which is charged while in a shield wall counts as in a shield wall formation for the duration of the subsequent fighting, regardless of whether individual models are removed. It's like the tortoise from the Romans. Slow. Slow units move at reduced pace as shown on their special rule column. For example, a slow 3 would mean that his movement would be 3, and therefore his run would be 6, and his sprint would be 9. Although this might seem rather an onerous penalty, most things that are slow are artillery units or machines. Spectral undead. Insubstantial, ethereal, intangible, and possibly imaginary. These are basically your ghosts and spooks. They are kind of undead, and all the rules described for undead also apply to these shady types. In addition, the following rules apply. Fire. If a unit has a spectral undead rule, all hits from fire attacks are automatically resisted, cause no damage, and do not afflict the additional pin. Ignore all rough terrain and obstacles. If a unit has the spectral undead rule, it counts all rough terrain as open ground for movement, and ignores all tests and penalties for crossing obstacles. They just float over or possibly through to spirit. Many sorcerers enjoy the benefit of a spirit guide that takes some form or another, perhaps an animal or a companion, a demon or an imp or cat. Creatures with a spirit rule are automatically destroyed if their sorcerer, once their masters are no more, they vanish. Creatures with a spirit rule can be willingly sacrificed by their master in exchange for a reroll. If a test for a reroll of a test that the unit has failed, remove one of the spirit models and make the reroll again. For example, only a single reroll is permitted from any source. Spirits can take part in exchange of missiles during close combat, hissing, spitting, swirling, and tickling the enemy. Picture their attacks as you wish. They cannot otherwise shoot. They shoot once with the SV indicated on their stat line. In other respects, creatures with the spirit rule participate in the battle just like other models. They can strike in hand-to-hand combat, suffer hits like other models. They can be removed as a casualty, banished, or whatever they can. So I might do something like this, like Morty, my necromancer, might have spirit spider with, and then he can just discard the spider for a reroll. Or if they get into hand-to-hand, the spider will actually stampede. Great big monsters are well and good, but being creatures of little brain and primitive instincts, they can suddenly take fright and go into a raging fury, defying riders and crew to control them, rampaging about and scaring the pants of everyone in their way. In other words, they stampede. If you take an order test for a monster with this rule and fail on a roll of a 10, then instead of going down like other units that fail, the monster stampedes instead. Stampeding monsters are entirely unpredictable. They go in any direction. So to find out where they go, roll a 10 as close to the monster as possible, turn the monster to face in that direction indicated by the point of the D10, same as overhead shooting. So, like, if this is a monster that had the stampede rule, and I rolled my die as close to him as possible, that 6 is pointing in this direction. I don't know if you can see the arrow, it points that direction. So you can imagine he would move in that direction. This is the same as described in overhead shooting. If you're not sure, check that out. The monster's order die is changed to run, and the beastie heads off in that direction, shown at 2M run move plus the die score of the D10. So if his move is 5, just to say, 2M is 10 plus 6 more is 16. So he's going 16 inches in that direction. If there are units in the path, it tramples over them and continues moving. If it ends its move within 1 inch of another unit, then it tramples on it. And the unit must also move away to comply with the usual gap rule. Should the unit be unable to move for whatever reason, then move the stampeding monster instead, but they still get trampled. A unit that is trampled on suffers hand-to-hand attacks from the monster in the same way as a unit it has charged. It doesn't matter whether the unit is friend, foe, innocent bystander. If it's in the way, it gets trampled. Any crew of the monster do not fight. They are too busy hanging on, screaming, weeping, praying for what forth. The creature does not exchange missiles, even if it is capable of doing so. It just tramples. Units trampled on haven't been engaged in combat and can't fight back. They just get bowled aside and flattened by the stampeding monster. Okay, so if this creature only had one attack, and it was going this way, it would go one attack on him, one attack on him, one attack on them, and keep going, you know. Stealthy. These are your sneaking about in the bushes up to no good types. Any shooting hits against stealthy models that are within cover must be re-rolled. Stubborn. Stubborn types shrug off discouragement and danger with a sneer and contemptuous gesture. If a unit has a stubborn rule, then every time it takes and passes an order test, it removes 2 pins instead of 1. It still removes 1 pin if the order test is failed. Surly. Surly troops are uppity beggars who don't know their place. They have no respect for their betters. They are probably plotting rebellion. If a unit is surly, then it cannot benefit from command, follow, or hero rules. They steadfastly ignore all efforts of the high and mighty to cajole them into action. So it's just, they just ignore you. Terror. Most extremely large monsters are understandably terrifying, and their mere proximity is sufficient to reduce their average person to jabbering, incontinent heap. Terror affects units but cannot affect another unit that causes terror, or units that are immune to terror. When a unit takes an order test within 15 inches, no pins are removed from the testing unit regardless of the result or any special rule that otherwise allows a unit to remove pins. Even stubborn units that normally remove 2 pins when successfully given orders remove no pins if they're within 15 of a terrifying unit. When an enemy unit takes a break test within 5 inches, it is automatically destroyed if the test has failed. This applies whether the enemy is fighting the terror causing it or not, just as long as the terroring unit is within 5 inches. If a routing unit moves within 5 inches or finds itself within 5 inches of a terrifying foe, it's destroyed. Note that the effect of terror are less immediately dangerous than, say, a cannon shot or gout of flame from a fire-breathing dragon. However, terror is in many respects far more dangerous than either of these things. It can affect many enemy units at once, and combined with attacks or magic that inflicts pins upon a unit, can soon reduce units to ineffectual wrecks. Tough. Reroll failed resist tests. Undead. You can't easily frighten the undead. Cannot be routed. A unit with the undead rule, it takes break tests in the usual way, but cannot be routed as a result of failing tests. Continues to fight. Undead can be destroyed as a result of the break test, and still suffers pins when they fail break tests. They just cannot be driven to rout. Choking attacks. If it's an undead rule, they're immune to choking. They don't breathe. Venomous attacks. They don't bleed, so they don't get poisons. Dread. If a unit has the undead rule, it is not affected by dread. Terror. It's not affected by terror. Unstoppable. Unstoppable missiles don't stop when they hit something. They pass through it and strike targets behind it. We already talked about that in Vengeful. Vengeful troops get awfully mean when their comrades are hurt. If a vengeful unit wins the first round of combat, then it must elect to follow on. Venomous. Venomous attacks are hand-to-hand attacks associated with toxic or poisonous stings or bites. If a creature has venomous attacks, then work out how many venomous hits are scored in hand-to-hand fighting as normal. If at least 1 hit is scored, then one additional hit then add 1 additional hit. So if you roll and no hits are scored, then no additional hits. But if I hit you 3 times, we'll count it as 4 hits. Warhorse. A warhorse is a mount of specially sturdy and martial character, bred to bear the weight of steel-clad aristocracy without complaint. Whirling dervishes. Goblin whirling dervishes are an unusual and all-round dangerous troop type comprising a number of drugged-up, deranged goblins armed with long chains, to the end of which is fastened a heavy weight, frequently a cannonball, sometimes another goblin. Fueled by a secret blend of intoxicants, a unit of whirling dervishes has different formation rules to other units. Individual whirling dervishes in the unit must keep at least 1 inch apart and can be up to 2 inches apart to retain their formation. This means they move in a slightly looser formation than other units. They don't take break tests, but a unit accumulating as many pins as a command stat is still destroyed. A unit of whirling dervishes can only be given a run order, cannot be given any other order. It can be given a sprint if you wish, testing for exhaustion. If it goes down for any reason, then the goblins are whirling around and round in disoriented circles like tops. If it fails an order on a 10, then instead of going down, the unit heads off in a random direction as described below. If it moves into another unit, friend or foe, this is a charge. Good luck. When shooting at a unit of whirling dervishes, all successful hits must be re-rolled. It's impossible to fight back against a unit of whirling dervishes in hand-to-hand combat. The only exception is another unit of whirling dervishes. In hand-to-hand, whirling dervishes do not roll against their strength score to score hits. Instead, the unit automatically scores d6 hits, plus 1 further hit for each goblin in the unit. And they have a strike value of 4. Although the whirling dervishes' enemies don't fight back in hand-to-hand, the goblin's own weapons pose almost as great a threat. Any hits that are saved by the opponent's resistance test automatically score damage on the whirling dervishes, just as if they had failed a resist test themselves. For example, there are 3 whirling dervishes and they roll a 4, so that's 4 plus 3, 7 hits on the opposing unit. The opposing player takes 7 resist tests and fails 5, but passes 2. That means the enemy has lost 5 models and the whirling dervishes have also lost 2 models. Calculate which side has won the combat, counting any dead goblins as casualties from hand-to-hand fighting and adding pins on both sides the usual way. If the whirling dervishes have not won the combat, when the whirling dervish unit is automatically destroyed. The remaining dervishes manage to tangle themselves in knots, fall to the ground exhausted, or otherwise collapse in a inert heap. Note that this applies to draws as well. If they win the combat, then the survivors immediately move in a random direction as described below. If they move into another unit, friend or foe, they count as charging and go through the whole rigmarole again. Note, you can't do this into a unit you have just fought. It has to be a different unit. This can happen any number of times. To move a unit, a whirling dervish, in a random direction, begin by nominating one model in the unit, roll a d10 as close to the model as you can, turn the model to face the direction indicated by the point of the d10, same as everything else. Goblin heads off in 2 move plus the die score, same as trample. If it moves into another unit, then the whirling dervish has charged it, and we work out close combat all over again. Either way, the player moves all the remaining dervishes back into formation. Note that the dervishes can move entirely through the unit they were previously fighting and can do so without penalty. They burst through their enemy and come out the other side. If a unit has been attacked by the dervish is defeated, it can consolidate after the dervishes have moved, assuming it survives. If victorious, the unit can consolidate after the dervishes are destroyed. Wild monster. Wild monsters are barely controllable creatures, and your best chance is to point them at the enemy and hope they get the right idea. They cannot benefit from command hero or follow special rules. Going wild. If a wild monster fails an order test on a roll of 10, then it immediately takes d6 pins. If this is sufficient to auto-break the monster, then it goes wild. The unit counts as a casualty, as would any other automatically broken unit. However, rather than removing the model from play, instead leave it where it is. Remove all of its pins, and remove all of its order dice, including any still left in the die bag. At the turn end phase, place 1 distinctly colored order die in the bag to represent the monster from the beginning of the next turn. It does not matter if the monster normally has more than 1 order die. Once it goes wild, it only gets 1 order die. When the monster's order die is drawn, both players roll a die and a higher score controls the monster for that turn. Further order test fails on a 10 have no additional effect. Woodsman. Why anyone would want to live in the wood, let alone up in a tree, is anyone's guess. But among your tree-hugging types, nothing could be better. If a unit has the woodsman rule, then any models within wooded terrain are otherwise entitled to a cover bonus to the resistance. Add a further 1 to that bonus. So if the woods give you a 1 resistance, they get it too. Units with the woodsman rule treat rough wooded terrain as open terrain, which means they don't have to roll agility, they just move. Wound. Only very powerful individuals have some extraordinary monsters have the wound special rule. A model with the wound special rule is not removed as a casualty when it fails a resist test and would otherwise fall casualty. The model becomes wounded instead. A wound model can fight on, but if it fails a further resist test, it is removed as a casualty just like any other model. Although wounded models suffer no specific individual penalties, the unit the model is part of can never remove one pin, regardless of other rules that remove pins from the unit. It is stuck with one permanent pin once the model is wounded. It is possible for a model to have multiple wounds, as shown on wounds 2, wounds 3, and so forth. If a model has suffered 2 or more wounds, each wound struck increases the permanent pin penalty to the unit by 1. This means that you might have a hero has suffered 3 wounds, still never able to reduce their pins below 3. The wound rule does not save a unit from automatic destruction. Zealous. Zealous types are motivated by a vision of a world that bears almost no relationship to actuality. Zealous units ignore the penalty from pins when making break tests. They still acquire pins, they just don't modify their die roll. If a zealous unit would fail an order test, it can re-roll the result. Obviously, the second result stands even if worse. Heaven knows what's going on in the minds of a zealot. It's better not to ask. Zombie. Zombies don't go down if they fail an order test. Oh no, they just keep coming, no matter how mangled, decayed, or badly confused they might be. The basic zombie motivation is to hurl themselves shambolically upon a victim and attempt to maul, paw, bite, and otherwise impose themselves upon the chosen target's personal space. Quite rude. If a unit with a zombie special rule fails an order test, it automatically gets an advanced order rather than going down. Zombies cannot make a sprint move. Zombies can make a standard 2M run move with their appropriate order, but must test their agility once they have done so and take a pin if this fails, making a run order as if making a run order for sprints. They are too shambolic to run very fast. They cannot benefit from hero, follow, or command special rules. Zombie Master. Zombies are generally blind and deaf to the encouragement of the living. Cries of "go get them brains" generally go over their heads, assuming they have heads, which cannot be taken for granted. Only a zombie master, a powerful and absurdly evil sorcerer or undead entity, can hope to control a zombie. Like Morty. Morty's my necromancer. Mortimer. If a character model has a zombie master special rule, then it can use its hero, follow, and command special rule on behalf of a zombie unit within range. In other words, the zombies can use the character's command stat for taking any command-based tests, or initiative stat for making reaction tests. Alright, now that was a lot of special rules, so what we're going to do is we're going to do spells and wizardry in the next video. Alright guys, thanks for coming out and checking out this. I was going to do spells and wizardry with my shaman and my necromancer, but we're going to go ahead and do that in the next video. Catch you then.